Labby Till, Habits That Count, every Sunday at 5:30 p.m. with Dr. Martha J. The Habit every discussion. Learn how it affects your development. Labby Till with Dr. Martha J. every Sunday at 5:30 p.m.
Let's remember to say good morning, thank you, excuse me, and I'm sorry. Simple acts of courtesy help make our world a much better place.
A message from the National Cultural Council.
Martha J to bring you La Habitil. Hey, Martha J, good afternoon.
To another episode of Labitil Habits That Count. It's a place where we examine issues and concerns and we identify practices or habits that we can implement to fix them. And I am your host, Dr. Martha J. And of course, Labitil is brought to you through the kind compliments of some family members, Hilltop Renovations, distinguished and dependable for all your accommodations and your renovation needs, Rainbow Constructions for all your classic home construction, Leonard Taxi for your reliable and affordable taxi service in St. Thomas, and of course, Budding Writers Academy, where we empower educators to equip students. And if you're listening in the Caribbean, you're listening locally in Dominica, or you're listening in the diaspora, or anywhere on the mainland, or wherever you're listening internationally, I just want to say to you, thank you for your listen. And if you're listening locally in DBS and you want to call, the number to call is 448-3284 or 1-800-327. And if you want to call internationally, the number to call is 305-432-9744. Again, thank you and welcome. So today, this week, our focus is on the principles of giving. We want to look at some habits that we can implement to engage in the act. Giving is considered a noble act, and we want to be able to see what are some principles we can utilize to engage in that particular act. When we think of giving, a lot of people usually think of giving to the poor, which is charitable, or giving in church, which is offering. This week, the United Nations has designated the 5th of September as International Charitable Day. And for them, the definition of charitable is they think of donating to money, services, time, and sometimes goods and services actually to charitable organizations. Usually it's for the cause of, say, a social cause, an environmental cause, an educational cause, or a humanitarian need. They usually have it for disasters and all of those things. And usually you make those contributions to nonprofits, or whether they're church organizations or educational organizations for educational programs and stuff like that. But then we have a set of people who, some of us, we don't care for nonprofits and we don't go to church. So if that's you, if you fall in one of those categories, today's session is about the ordinary person. What do we do what do we think of when we think of giving? So we're going to focus on the definition that would include all of those people that would normally be exempted from nonprofit or church. You don't go to church and you don't support nonprofit, then today is definitely for you as well. And the reason I want to do that is because giving is supposed to be a notable, it's a law of life. It's something that it's like a churning. You give, you receive. And so if you don't go to church and you don't support charitable contributions, what's going on? When do you get that opportunity to make sure that you're receiving because you're giving? So I prefer to look at giving as an act that surpasses money. It is anchored in the act that we engage in out of love and out of compassion and gratitude. So today, what I hope to answer for you is, what should I give? Because some people would like to say, oh, I'm poor and I don't have anything to give. So the first question I'm going to answer for us today is, what should I give? The next question you have is, how should I give? I want to answer that as well. And to whom should I give? If I don't go to church and I don't support nonprofit, to whom should I give? And of course, the last question is, how often should I give? So hopefully I can tackle all of those for us before we leave today. So let's start off with number one. What do I give? First of all, I want to ask you, what do you have? All right. Steve Goodyear, he says, money is not the only commodity that is fun to give. We can give time. We can give our expertise. We can give love. We can give a simple smile. What does that cost? The point is, none of us can ever run out of something worthwhile to give. That's what Steve says. And I agree with him. So you shouldn't sit around in a corner and say, well, I don't have money to give. You probably have a smile. You have time. You have all of those things that you can give. So let's talk about time a little bit. So you don't have money. You say you're poor. How can you use your time? You can visit someone who probably is shut in. That person is stuck inside. They're probably sick. And they're probably just going to wait for one person to bring lunch for them. What about those days when we went around to visit the sick? I know now in Dominica, especially, we have the NEP. In America, we have other programs where we have people go and visit the poor or visit, just go ahead and make sure that the shut-ins have company. But there was a time when those programs didn't exist. What did we do? We made some time in our time because we don't have any money, and we would go ahead and spend some time with those people. Okay, what about your expertise? You probably do not have any money to give to someone, but you have something. Somebody's nailing something and you know how to do it better. That's an opportunity to give. You probably have a word of encouragement. Sometimes that's all you have. Pick up that phone and call someone and give them that word of encouragement. You probably can just pray for somebody. So make sure that take stock. What it is that I have, and how can I make sure that I give that? All right. So you can give money if you have it. You can give time if you don't have money. You can give your expertise. You can encourage someone. You can pray for someone. So I want to make sure that you understand that you have something to give no matter who you are. So we're not going to make excuses. We know that we do have things to give. The next thing we normally ask is how to give. Of course, I'll always bring in some biblical principles. Freely you give, freely you receive. So the two ways I want you to think of giving is freely and proportionately. So I'm going to talk about freely first. Somebody says, if you give of yourself without expecting in return, and the more you do that, the more you will get. We always tell that to people. In other words, you shouldn't be giving something and saying, I gave her last time, so now it's her turn to give me. No, you gave and somebody else is going to give you. So stop giving and waiting for you to get back. Number one, giving is a law already. Once you give, it's automatic. You're going to receive. What are you going to receive? You'll receive what you need. For example, if you went ahead and you have 2 pounds of rice and you give out 1, you shouldn't be sitting here waiting to get back rice. You probably need sardines, and that's what you're going to get, not necessarily from the same person. So think of giving freely. In other words, when you give, forget that you gave. And when you receive, don't forget that you receive, because you need to show appreciation. As a child, my granny used to send me over to the neighbor, Eugene, because she would call and ask for help. And whether it's to go and get some water from the well back at the back of her house area, or pick something, just reach something for her. If when I went to help, I came back with some pennies or a quarter, I had to take it back. My granny's philosophy was, when I did something for someone, I was not supposed to get paid, because I was giving of my time. If I got a banana, that was fine. But if I got money, I had to return it. The point is, she wanted to instill in me that when you bless people, you should not expect a payment in return. So if I'm giving my time, I shouldn't be waiting here for you to pay me. Okay? And so practice giving without expecting, especially from the people you gave. You shouldn't be expecting from the people you gave, or just say, oh, well, all I've been doing is giving and giving. Well, maybe you're thinking about it too much. Because who knows? Maybe you got back what? Good health? Maybe you got back an opportunity. Give freely and you will receive freely. Mother Teresa said, never be afraid of giving. There's a deep joy in giving, since what we receive is much more than what we give. So I want to say to us that you want to be able to give freely. When you give freely, you're going to receive freely. Don't worry about, well, I have been giving, or I gave her last time and she never gave me. That's okay. Don't worry about it. You will receive freely. The other thing I want to say is, you want to give proportionately. In other words, if you have $100, you shouldn't be giving away the entire $100. You will give away a portion of that money. And if you have 1 hour, that's your time, you shouldn't have to give away the entire hour either. Or if you have a day off, you shouldn't have to give the entire thing away. You want to make sure that you understand the purpose of giving proportionately. Now, when I was growing up, every time I went to church, my granny gave me a penny or 25 cents or whatever it was I had to give to the offering. When I went to my mom's in Carib, it was the same thing. We would always be given money for offering. So we don't know where it came from. We just got money for offering, and we knew that we had to give an offering. But when I started living in Maho with my cousins, I understood for the first time at age 12 the principle of the tithe. I had $9.50, and before I did anything, I can remember my cousin, the older of the girls, would say, make sure you take your tithe off. And of course, that was hard. If you had $9.50 and you had to remove $1 because, $9.50, you just round it up to give to offering, it was hard. So although I was raised to give an offering, I didn't understand the tithe until I was 12. So guess what? That's only 10%. So let's look at it like a corn. You have an ear of corn, and that ear of corn has 100 corns on it. And then you removed 10 grains of corn and you put it on the side, and you said, that is your seed. That is for you to sow for the future. Now, let us suppose that you ate the other 90 corn you had. Tell me something. Would you really go back and take those 10 grains of corn to make a meal? It's not enough, right? It's not even enough for a meal. And so that's the mentality that I have gotten over the years, is that the tithe is not even enough for a meal. And that's why I'm not even going to keep it. Okay? So I am not here to tell you to give a 10th. You can give 50% if you want. You could give whatever percentage you want. The point is, make it be proportionate. There's a guy in history, his name is Latourneau. He lived between 1888 and 1969. And he is the guy who was credited, or who was known to give 90% of his wealth because he had a Christian business. The point is, he didn't start off by giving 90% of his wealth. He said, in his own words, I shoveled money to God, and God shoveled money back to me. The thing is, God's shovel was bigger than mine. So he's saying that because he gave freely, his business ended up growing so much that he felt like 1/10 was not enough. He started giving away 90% of his profits to charitable contribution. I'm not here to tell you what percentage to give away. All I'm saying is it is a wise idea to give proportionate. And here's why. Solomon says, a slack hands brings poverty. My mom would always remind me about that. She would say, a slack hands bring poverty. In other words, if you made $100, you give away 100, you're going to have nothing. All right. And if you know the principle of, Joseph, again, biblical analogy, where he asked Egypt to save 1/5. So whatever you decide to save, you want to make sure that you put some away for future. But the point is you want to give proportionately. And the same thing for your time. Don't just give away. If you have 1 week off, you shouldn't give the entire week to charity or to somebody who needs it. You want to make sure that you save some time for yourself because you have to rejuvenate as well. Okay? So the first thing we did was what to give. You give what you have. How to give. You want to give freely and you want to give proportionately. And the next thing we want to talk about is to whom should you give? So some people we have a hard time deciding whom to give to. And I am not here to tell you whom to give to. So for example, if you're one of those who you don't go to church, you don't have a nonprofit organization, you don't know who to give to. So what would I say? I would say to you, give to someone you trust. So if you don't go to church, you don't have a nonprofit organization, there is somebody in your neighborhood who probably needs the money that you're thinking of giving. You're probably in the grocery line and there is somebody you need to give to. There's a child somewhere that needs sponsoring. By the way, I was a sponsored child. When I went to high school, I was sponsored. When I went to high school. So although I had a scholarship fee, it was hard life in the 80s for my parents to take care of me when I went to board and lodge. And so somebody from Canada, through Canada Save the Children Fund, gave. And that sustained me from my 3rd year of high school all the way up to my 5th year. Even my calculator was bought. This guy sent my calculator because he worked at a Radio Shack. The point I'm making is somebody decided that they were going to give a little girl in Dominica whom they did not know. And that contributed towards my education. Today, how do I pay back? I make sure that I always have a child that's being sponsored. So whether that child is in Guatemala or wherever they are, I try my best to make sure that I have a sponsorship that is, consistently maintained because somebody did the same thing for me. So the point is, you do not need to. If you are not involved in church and you do not have a nonprofit that you support, find someone in your community and go ahead and give them that money. There might be somebody in line in the groceries that you need to pay for. Find what people need, make time and support them. We cannot afford to not enjoy that law of giving. Remember, the law of giving says, the more you give, the more you receive. The more you give, the more you receive. And so you want to make sure that you do that. The next thing I want to answer is, how often? People want to ask how often that you give. So how often you give? You want to develop a habit of giving. Do not feel like, I can only give once a year. Some people do that. Some people give just once a year. But I can't tell you must give every month. What if you don't receive money every month? Well, if you don't receive money every month, you can actually give something else. You can probably give your time. You can give your expertise. You can give your encouragement. You can pray. So how often you give is up to you. Whom do you give to is up to you. But I want you to understand that it is a principle. one of the books that I've read is The Alchemist, and he says that there's the principle of the 1/10 in there, but it's also the first fruit too. The guy, the first candy he made, he ended up giving it to someone because he believed that if he gave, he will get more. So the point I'm making is go ahead and give freely. Argila Turner, the guy I spoke about earlier, he ended up having 300 patents. And he said that it was just that he always gave, and so he just received and received and received and received. So I want to encourage you. Remember that giving is like a churn, all right? Think of what it is that you're getting back. Don't worry about if you give money doesn't mean you're going to get back money. It could be good health. It could be an opportunity. I mean, what is better than an opportunity? An opportunity means that it just keeps giving and giving and giving. It doesn't run out. It could be care. You care for people now, and then somebody end up taking care of you later on. It could be money too. All right. It could be something that you're not even expecting, but people are always going to look out for you. That's how God operates. And The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho puts it in a different way. So remember, I said giving is a law. So whether we look at it from the biblical standpoint, I would say, give and it shall be given to you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over because you give freely. Or whether you believe in the Old Testament where it says, if you give, that he will open the windows of heaven and pour on you. Or whether you want to think of what Paulo Coelho says when he says, the universe conspires to help you. Whichever one of those areas you want to think of, I just want you to know that the law of giving is like that. It turns. You give and you receive. I want to share with you a few quotes from people who, talk about giving. Maya Angelou says, giving liberates the soul of the giver. Think about that. Giving liberates the soul of the giver. So you give and then it just liberates your soul. Ben Carson says, happiness does not result from what we get, but from what we give. In other words, you're not getting the happiness because of what you get. It's from what you give. There's that feeling when you make time for people, when you give somebody something because they needed it. And then Booker T. Washington says, those who are happiest are those who most often care for others. Those who do most for others. You look out for people, you are happier than, anybody else you can think of. And then Helen Keller says, the unselfish effort to bring cheer to others will be the beginning of a happier life for yourself. All of these people talk about the happiness that you feel when you give. So as we wrap up, how do I develop an attitude of giving? Especially if I'm one of those people, I do not care for church, I do not care for nonprofits, but I need to experience that law. I need to experience the law and the benefits that we get from giving. Give and it shall be given unto you. And if you give freely, you give proportionately, what's going on? You want to experience that? Here's what I want to say to you. First thing, take stock. What do you have? So if you're saying you don't have money, think about how much time you have. Think about who you can pray for. Think about whom you can encourage. Think about whom you can just do a simple act of kindness for. I think it's Mahatma Gandhi who said, simple acts of kindness are far more powerful than 1,000 heads bowing in prayer. So you might say, oh, I'm going to pray for you. But guess what? If you have the neighbor across the street and they need a branch come off their yard, you're not going to pray for them. What you need to do is go over and help them. All right? They didn't ask you for an organ. They asked you for just to lift something out of the way for them. So there are times when, yes, we pray for people, but there are times all it takes is a simple act of kindness from you. So according as Mahatma Gandhi says, simple acts of kindness sometimes are way better than 1,000 heads bowing in prayer. So don't just say, oh, I will pray for you if you know that you can help. All right. So number one, Find out what you have and use that. Number two, how much? Well, you do it freely. Freely you give, freely you will receive. And of course, you want to do it proportionately. Usually caretakers, we have a habit of wanting to give all your time and not take time for yourself. And usually you crash sometimes even before the person you're taking care of. So make sure that you're paying attention to that as well and give proportionately. And remember, Solomon says, a slack hand brings poverty. So if you just want to give everything away, then of course you're going to find yourself lacking and have to ask people for. So make sure you do that. The next thing you want to do is, whom do you give? Find somebody. Find someone who needs something. Find a charitable organization, find a church. And if you don't trust any of those two organizations, that's okay. Find someone in your community. Find somebody whom you trust and give, because when you do that, you are making sure that you are receiving. You are stirring. It's like a movement. So giving is like a law of life. You give, you're going to get back. But how do you churn that if you're not giving? If you're not giving, and guess what Latoro says? He said, the more you have, the more you should give. So imagine, if you have $100 and you find it hard to give away $10, if you have $100,000, you're going to find it even harder to give away $10,000 if you're not accustomed of giving. And guess what? If you have $100,000, it shouldn't be a problem to give away more than $10,000, because the more you have, the more you should give and the more you'll get as well. The next thing is how often you should give. I just want to say to you, develop a habit of giving. So whether you decide you want to give every month, every week, every day, it's up to you. But I want you to develop a habit of giving. It should not be a one-time thing. Find somebody who needs help. Find somebody who needs something that you have. It doesn't have to be money. And I don't want you sitting around saying, oh, I don't have money to give. Well, probably you're right. You don't have money to give, but you probably have time. You probably have a word of encouragement. You probably have an expertise. You can probably volunteer, all right, to someone else. And then the last thing I want you to do is, of course, develop a habit. So think of what you're sowing. I want to stop on that note. Think of what you're sowing. A lot of times, before I even get to that, the Bible says that when you give in secret, you'll be rewarded openly. And sometimes people are doing very well and they're being rewarded openly. And then people who do not understand the principle of giving, they begin to talk and say things like, oh, they come up with all kind of conspiracy theories as to where you're getting their money from. And I know of cases that people start saying, oh, such and such is getting their money from such and such. And they have all sorts of reasons and places to find out where you're getting your money from. But they didn't understand that you were actually giving all the time. You don't go blowing a horn saying that I gave such and such, such and such. You give secretly. You give because you see a need, and God blesses you and you receive. And now people are beginning to make conspiracy theories as to where you got your blessings from. Don't worry about it, because just keep giving, and it's going to keep the gift of giving is going to keep giving, and you are going to continue to be blessed, whether it's in your health, whether it's in your mind, whether it's opportunities. You're going to continue to be blessed. And then I want to say to the rest of us, be careful what you give, because whatever we give, that's what we will, whatever we sow, that's what we reap. So don't go around bad-mouthing people and sending out bad vibes out there, because that's what you're attracting to yourself. So be careful. Make sure that if you don't have anything positive to give, try something else. Look for encouragement. Go spend some time praying for somebody instead, rather than trying to sit out there on social media or anywhere else and just send out bad stuff out there, because that's what you're going to be attracting to yourself. All right, folks, you've been listening to Labby Till, Habits That Count with Dr. Martha J. And I want to say to you, thank you so much for your listen. And I want to remind you, develop a habit of giving. Think of what you have. Give freely, give proportionately. When you give something, forget that you gave. When you receive, always remember to show appreciation. To whom do you give? That's for you to decide. Make sure you give anyway. And how often you give, I want you to develop a habit of giving. This month, for the rest of September, we will be talking about literacy. We have literacy next week. We're going to talk about coding, about robotics, and how we can utilize those things to become better individuals and become strong citizens. I want to say to you, those of you who have been listening to the podcast version on Spotify and you've been leaving comments, thank you so much. Those of you who haven't listened, if you're not a Facebook fan and you're not a YouTube fan, that's okay. We put this on Spotify or Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. You just have to type in Labby Till and you can go ahead and listen. And when you listen, we are asking you to like, follow, leave a message, take the poll, rate the show, and tell us. If you have a question that you want to ask, go ahead and ask the question, and we will be sure to respond to your question. I want to say to those of you listening, thank you again for your listen. It has been a pleasure sharing with you. This is Inspiration Sunday. And this is the time when I take some time to just inspire you. So I want to say to you, remember, show kindness to someone. Give something, whether it's your time, your money, your word of encouragement, your prayer. Give something. And of course, plant a seed, it will grow. Thank you again for your listen. I appreciate you. And until next time, I am your host, Dr. Martha J, saying bye-bye.